The theme for the month of March is integrity. Being in integrity in word and deed, speaking from our true motivation, being honest, and telling the true facts as we know them, and living from that place. And so, what I'm talking about today is fasting from fear and feasting on flow. We're now in the 40 days before Easter, this period that in the Christian tradition we call Lent. It started on Wednesday. Mardi Gras means Fat Tuesday. It's the last day before Lent starts. That's why they have a big party that day. And then Wednesday becomes Ash Wednesday. So you go from celebrating life to recognizing death. And so that's kind of, and then from there you jump into Lent, which used to be about abstaining from everything that gave you pleasure, pretty much, in order to remind yourself of the suffering of Jesus. I don't think that Jesus was all about suffering. That's actually not my take on him at all. I think that probably the message would be to feast on what nourishes the soul and fast from what starves it or what diminishes it. So what we want to do in the next period of weeks before Easter is some fasting and some feasting, but we're fasting from things that diminish us and feasting on things that bring us back to our true selves. You with me here so far? Okay. So, speaking of fear, this is from Jerry Seinfeld. According to most studies, people's number one fear is public speaking. Number two is death. Death is number two. He says, does that sound right? He says, this means that to the average person, if you go to a funeral, you're better off in the casket than you are doing the eulogy. So you might want to rethink that fear just a little bit. We're looking at some of these things from a standpoint of our definitions. What do we see them as? So fear. Forget everything and run. This is a one of the acronyms, slightly tweaked to make it more palatable in church, about expressing and experiencing fear. Another one is false evidence appearing real. So when we are taken up by fear, the fear itself can start to scare us. Our founder, Ernest Holmes, says fear and faith are identical, in that the energy used in one is the same energy as that used in the other. Since there is but one final energy in the universe, and this final energy is the energy of thought. Fear is a positive acceptance that you shall experience that which you dislike. Faith is a positive acceptance that you shall experience that which you do like. But they are identical in this mental action. The only difference is in the direction. Where do we have this faith pointed? Today we want to talk about flow, the place where you know you're in the zone, entering into flow. And I would say that flow, we could use the acronym of feeling life's optimal waves, sort of surfing those optimal waves. That's what it feels like to be in flow. Now, I want to also identify fasting, because fasting has generally been, in the Lenten tradition, to abstain from food at certain periods of time, to abstain from eating, to fast. When we enter into this feasting on flow and fasting from fear, we first have to look at what it is that we do when we feast on fear. And it's so easy to get caught up in things to be afraid of. When do we feel afraid? Well, this is not showing up as well as I'd like, because you can see down here it says skill. So this is going directionally this way. This is from 0 to the increase of skill. And this is from 0 to the increase of challenge. So the higher the challenge and the lower the skill level, the more likely we are to feel anxiety. And the higher the skill level and the lower the challenge, the more likely we are to feel bored. In the middle, this excitement zone, where we're in a perfect balance of challenge and skill or ability, That's the zone where we're engaged, we're excited, we're challenged, but we're not frightened. We're enthusiastic, we're engaged. We're part of it. So when the challenge is high and the skill level is low, that's when we feel fear. Or when the stakes are high and the outcome is uncertain and we don't know if we're up to it, that's when we tend to feel fear. What is it that we feel fear about? Well, we feel fear if we've done something that we know we shouldn't have. We might feel fear of being caught. We might fear losing something that's of value to us, a relationship or an object or a position or a particular type of power. Or we might fear being rejected, being alone, being abandoned, being left out. Last week I told a story about my son at age about 5 being part of a classroom survey where they asked all the kids what their favorite color was. And they made a chart, with like a bar chart, showing which colors were the favorites. And red had won. Now, I knew that my son's favorite color was yellow, so I said, oh, look at that, your yellows are over here. And he said, I said red. He said red. It was obvious to me why, because I could relate to that. Can't you? Yes, no? You know, there are times that we agree with people in order to not ruffle things, in order to not make ourselves stand out in a way that makes us uncomfortable, that makes us feel fearful. We are afraid because we actually believe that separation is possible, that it would be possible for us to truly be alone. But being separate and being lonely, rather than solitude when we want it, feeling separate and feeling lonely, it's not entirely the world's problem. It's our choice of how we're interpreting what we're experiencing. Every single day of our lives that we leave our house, we encounter other human beings. Do we say hello to them? Do we make an offhand comment just to share their day a little bit with them? Do we do something kind for them? Those are ways in which we engage in being part of, being with, including ourselves, being community. We're taking advantage of the opportunity to connect with other people. And that's part of what our recognition of being connected is when we start to feel afraid. Ernest Holmes, our founder, said in my favorite book of his, this thing called You, there is something within you beyond all doubt and fear, something which has never been limited by your acts or destroyed by your feeling. This is the only something that can make you whole. Let me read that again. There is something within you beyond all doubt and fear, something which has never been limited by your acts or destroyed by your feeling. This is the only something that can make you whole. This something that he's talking about is our true identity, our connection with the infinite and with everything and everyone. This thing restores our wholeness when we put our attention and our energy into that rather than into our fear of lack of that. Does this make sense so far? So that's what feasting on fear looks like. Now we want to talk about fasting from fear, because fear does come up. The thing about fear is that we first want to acknowledge it, to face it, to recognize that it's there. So first we feel it. We notice it because we feel it. Eleanor Roosevelt said, "We gain strength and courage and confidence by each experience in which we really stop to look fear in the face. We must do what we think we cannot do." So instead of the guy with his head in the sand trying to pretend that fear isn't there, we look at it first. We acknowledge it. Yes, I see you. Yes, I feel this discomfort. I feel this nervousness or this fear. And then we breathe and we remember the larger truth that we know of who we are and where we are in truth. We're in the one, in the whole. We're in the presence. We can't ever get out of it. It's a full, infinite system, but it's complete and closed in and of itself. Nobody's outside of it. You couldn't leave it if you wanted to, and there's nowhere to go if you did. So we're in this place. Dale Carnegie said, inaction breeds doubt and fear. Inaction breeds doubt and fear. Action breeds confidence and courage. If you want to conquer fear, do not sit home and think about it. Go out and get busy. And I have found this to be true in my own life, that when I feel most fearful or most worried or most anxious, that is the time when I need to take action the most. And it doesn't have to be something big. It just needs to be something that moves me toward the goal or the solution that I want. Are you with me here? It can be something very small. It doesn't need to be the whole task, just one thing. And to set aside that place where we get into the worry loop. Anybody ever live in the worry loop? It's just when you get obsessed about something. Now, often, this worry loop shows up when you're just about to fall asleep. So your resistance is low, but your brain is still active, and you can't quite wake yourself up enough to intervene in it. You just go around and around in the squirrel cage. You don't quite go to sleep, but you don't really wake up unless you say, oh, this is ridiculous, and you get up and go make yourself a cup of tea and sit down with a book or something. Has anybody ever been there besides me? Okay. So in the book of Matthew, Jesus is reputed to have said to his disciples, and there are two different ways of translating this apparently, but they both mean the same thing. Can any one of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your life? And the other one is, the other translation is, can any one of you, by worrying, add a single cubit to your height? Now, I don't know how big a cubit is, but I know I can't worry myself into being tall, or at least it's never worked before. So Sky Nelson, who's with us this morning, he was here a couple weeks ago doing music. His new book is out, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later on. But I want to share with you something that he sent to me about engaging the process of flow so you can back out of fear. You want to know what it is? Yes? He says, the issue is, first of all, we spend a lot of our energy resisting feelings we don't want to have. Anybody else do that? I know I do. Okay? These are often feelings about possibilities, not actualities. We suffer so much from the worry that the thing doesn't even need to happen. We've already gone through hell, right? So these feelings of resistance, they block flow. So by allowing ourselves to think about something fearful, to put our awareness on it, we enter into a tunnel. It's hard to see to either side, and the only thing we can see is the specter that we fear at the end of the tunnel. So this exercise is about backing out of the tunnel, slowly moving away from the fear while we keep our eyes on that thing that we're afraid of, and retracing our steps until we leave this tunnel vision and we can see our surroundings again. It's stepping out of that loop, that worry loop. So he says the process is, first of all, to ask, this is flow, F-L-O-W, right? And I said a flow was feeling life's optimal waves. Okay, this is how Sky has identified each one of these. So fear is F. What is something I'm afraid will happen? Ask ourselves that. What am I afraid will happen? And then L, what am I afraid to lose? O, occur. What will happen to me? What will occur if I lose that? So, what is something I'm afraid will happen? What am I afraid to lose? What do I think will occur if I lose that? And finally, willingness to allow that possibility that we think we're afraid of, as well as other possibilities, but to be willing to let go into that. Byron Katie, when she teaches us, She actually has us turn it around to say, I'm looking forward to experiencing that, rather than, oh God, no, but actually welcoming the possibility. And it's interesting, when our resistance melts, that thing is not nearly as likely to show up when we make space for it as a possibility. And then finally, he says, feel what happens when you make space for the possibility that, yeah, it could go that way. What feelings arise? Maybe grief or sadness, or relates to something familiar from before. He says, by allowing the worst that could happen, possibilities to exist, we back ourselves out of the resistance we have to our difficult emotions and return to our own playful inner child that can see that bigger field of action, that bigger field of possibilities. And he says we can feel the emotions that come up from that without having to actually experience the loss. So we get back into the flow. So in essence, we are intentionally engaging the worry loop with consciousness and then completing that loop and stepping out of it. Did you follow all that? Yes. It's a great process to be able to do that. And basically what it does is it allows us to come back to feasting on flow. And one of the essential pieces of feasting on flow is focusing on now. Right now, in this moment, what I fear is not happening yet. I'm okay. I'm worried about the next moment, not about this one. In this moment, I am dealing with whatever the challenges of the moment are. Jesus said, don't worry about tomorrow. Today has enough stuff to worry about all on its own. So I'm in the present, I'm paying attention to what's going on right now, and I recognize that I could take an action right now, something small. What could I do right now? And what is true right now? Well, right now, I'm not quite warm enough, but I feel rested, I'm not hungry, I'm relatively comfortable, and things are pretty good. Things are pretty good. In this moment, I don't have a lot of complaints. So when I look at this moment and see what's true right now, what's true in this moment is okay. It's the next moment I get worried about. How about you? Does that happen? Yeah? So in this moment, I can ask myself, how can I choose the highest and best for myself in this moment? So this is when you've stepped out of the tunnel, you're back in the field of possibilities. What action can I take? What's true right now? What is the highest and best I could choose for myself in this moment? It's like water. Water flows in the path of least resistance to where it's going. It doesn't lose sight of going to the stream or the river or the ocean or the lake. It goes downhill and it goes through the areas that are the easiest to pass through. It follows those. It finds its own way. Sometimes if there's a huge amount of water, it makes its own way even bigger through those places. But we want to operate kind of like water. Non-resistant, persisting, and finding the open paths that move us toward the goal that we're seeking. And so if we're doing what we love, and if the action that we take or the highest good that we can do for ourselves is something that we love or that we enjoy or that we treasure, that will start to infuse us with energy. If we do that, do what we love, and do a little of what needs doing, then we can let it go. We can know that what we've done right now is enough. And we can step into the energy of the flow by doing that. You know, there's a song that Wayne Dyer used to teach this lesson, and you all know it. I'm going to say it to you, and then we're going to sing it as a round. And it's this one. Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream, merrily. Merrily, merrily, merrily. Life is but a dream. So, what is he saying? Okay, first of all, what are you doing? You're doing something, right? Row, what? Whose boat? Your own boat, not somebody else's boat. And which way do you row it? Down the stream. Sometimes when I'm feeling really caught in that worry loop, I feel like I'm trying to swim uphill in molasses. No, row your boat gently, gently down the stream. It's not a race. And with what attitude do we row this boat gently down the stream? Merrily. This is the stream of life. We're rowing down merrily because after all, really, the moral of the story is, this is pretty temporary. Life is but a dream. We came from doing something else. We're going to go on to do something else. But right now, let's row our boats gently down the stream. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to sing it through. And let's see. Sky, come on up here, because I need another leader. So, whoops. I'm going to lead this side. He's going to lead this side. And we're going to sing it as a round. Anybody not know row, row your boat? You just jump right in. Jump right in when you get it if you don't know it yet. Okay. Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream. Go on. Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream. Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream. Beautiful. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Sky, for that help. Ernest Holmes says, if you learn to think of life as flowing through your every action, you will soon discover that the things you give your attention to are quickened with new energy, for you are breathing the very essence of being into them. You feel the flow in your own body because you're breathing the very essence of being into them. And I want to close with a little story today. This is kind of poignant. In the spring of my junior year in high school, my friend Doug died. We weren't close friends, but in a graduating class of 65 students, losing one was enough to turn your world upside down. Doug was part of the preppy group, and I was part of the group Doug's friends made fun of. He wore Abercrombie & Fitch, hung out with jocks, and caught the attention of more than a few girls. I wore baggy t-shirts, befriended band geeks, and was a wallflower at school dances, lamenting, when are they going to play some Pearl Jam? We weren't that much alike, Doug and I, but we'd known each other for nearly 8 years, which was long enough for me to know something about him that not everyone knew. Doug had a heart condition. So when I heard one day in school during second period that he'd collapsed on the gym floor, I didn't think much of it. This had happened before and was probably nothing. By the end of the day, I'd forgotten all about it. We heard the announcement that Doug had died at 3 p.m. It came over the intercom 9 minutes before the dismissal bell rang. 9 minutes. Hardly enough to process a life-changing event, much less the death of a classmate. But that was all we had. Hearing the news, our eyes widened, our jaws dropped, but no one cried. We stared at each other, at the floor, at the teacher, looking for someone, anyone, to give us directions on how to react. We were all too young to know what to do. The bell rang, and no one moved. A minute later, our principal's voice crackled on the intercom, telling us we could go to the gym to talk with someone. Assembling in groups according to our social circles, grief finally set in. The preppies cried. The jocks sat solemnly. The goth kids asked, do we have to come to school tomorrow? But a lot of us simply sat in shock, unable to move our mouths or our feet. I didn't know what to do. Sitting in the bleachers and staring at the shiny wooden floor where Doug's body lay only hours before, I thought about life and death and my own mortality. It all seemed like too much for a 17-year-old to take in. And after 30 minutes of watching classmates weep while others made snide remarks, I went to my locker, grabbed my stuff, and drove home. 15 minutes later, my mom greeted me at the door, wrapping both arms around me and squeezed tight. Then I cried. That summer, life was different. We were all grieving, but each in our own ways. My friends and I decided to relish every moment we could because we now knew there was no promise of the next. It began with doing something I was deathly afraid of, picking up the phone. Since I didn't have many friends, I started with the people I ate lunch with, asking if we could get a group together to go bowling. This turned into a weekend ritual that soon grew into regular hangouts several times a week. Eventually, we did everything together, watched movies, studied together, even drove the downtown strip. There's not much else to do in rural Illinois on a Saturday night. We did anything we could to avoid being alone. Having spent the first 2.5 years of high school in hiding, a group of friends was new to me. Afraid of getting picked on for being too smart or too chubby or too geeky, too shy, too funny, or too different, I had done my best to become invisible. But now all those fears suddenly seemed trivial in the light of the gym floor. I'd seen somebody who seemed to have everything lose his life, and I wondered, what would I have to lose? The summer after Doug died, I lost 20 pounds. I became a runner and started eating healthy. I got a job as a cook at a restaurant and finally found a group of friends I could be myself with. Tragic as it was, something beautiful was born from that death. I don't think it had to happen, but it did. My friends and I weren't trying to make the most of it. We were just trying to survive. But in doing so, we learned a valuable, overlooked lesson about life. It doesn't last forever. Senior year came and went quickly. I asked Katie, the cheerleader, to the homecoming dance, and she said yes. I was also accepted to a private college on scholarship, and I got my first girlfriend, followed by my first breakup. Through it all, I learned to appreciate the ebb and flow of life, treasuring every moment as a gift. The following fall, I left home for school, and those next 4 years were some of the best in my life. I met people who would become some of my best friends, even married one of them. I studied abroad for a semester and got to see the world. I learned another language, fell in love with travel. I even began to discover my calling as a writer. Never again was I the invisible kid, the scared-to-death teenager who hid in the hallways. Now, I knew the cost of anonymity. I had learned that being noticed and vulnerable was nowhere near as scary as losing your life. Not the empty, fear-filled existence I'd had before, but the real, abundant life I now treasured. I learned all these lessons from an untimely death on a high school gym floor, or maybe perhaps in spite of it. Here we are, alive in this moment. This next breath is a gift. What will we do with this? To feast on the flow, on the abundance of the life that is given to us, rather than worrying about what might happen or feeling bad over something that happened before. Let's use this week to fast from fear. And when you feel it coming up, look it in the face, feel it, acknowledge it, and then go right on with your life. Let it be passing show, and instead feast on the flow of making the choice to live your life right now. Namaste. Oh, thank you. Thank you. All right, and we're going to take this into prayer. So I'm going to invite our practitioners now to surround the room, because it might be feeling a little bit daunting to make a shift like this. And so all of us together are going to pray aloud in a chamber of prayer to allow you to absorb a greater degree of courage and empowerment for your next steps coming out of this prayer for all of us. So we begin together. Right here and right now, I turn my attention to that presence, which is enormous, boundless, free-flowing, infinitely creative. It never fears, never doubts, never worries, but is always present fully and completely, always, ever, everywhere. It is full, it is joyous, it is filled with possibilities and opportunities, and that is the truth of me and my life right now, and the truth of every one of us in this place. So I know and claim for us greater courage, greater joy, taking big bites of life with enthusiasm and gusto, laughing loudly, sharing with one another, and enjoying the depth, the real depth, the joys and the sorrows fully of who we are. I know that we are ready and capable of this now, and I claim it for us with joy and delight. With great gratitude, I let this word go into the creative law and into the presence, and let it be. And so it is, right now. And so it is.